take another look at 922R compliance with the AK47. We've talked about the nuts and bolts of the laws and the codes, but now let's take a look at how they actually apply to the AK47 in real life. So we've got a couple of samples here that are imported AK47s to start with. We have the Sega 12 gauge and we have a 7.62x39 rifle. You can see they're both in their imported sporterized configuration, and although they can accept a high capacity magazine, sometimes they need to be altered a little bit to do so, and of course it puts you at risk of being in violation if you were to do so without first complying with 922R. I'm not going to get too much into the details of the code. We talked about that in the last video, but let's take a look then on the outside at two of them that have been converted. Now, since they use an imported receiver, imported barrel, imported trunnion, imported bolt carrier, imported bolt, we're pretty much stuck with those five. We're not going to find any US equivalents, in other words. Hand guards are pretty tough to find for a Sega, so for me I go with a pistol grip. It's easy to go with the 3 trigger parts. A lot of people will go with the stock for another number, but I choose to just shoot US mags in them. So both of these Segas that are converted are up to 7 US parts. The easiest thing to shoot with the AK-47 shotguns are the US made mags. These are AGP, made up the street in Phoenix, Arizona. Lots of other US options available though. For the Sega 7.62x39, I choose to go with foreign bodies so that they look correct, but then they use a US made floor plate and a US made follower. Inexpensive parts that swap out for the originals still give you that look of the original, and well, as far as you can get with a Sega. Let's take a look at some of the other parts. There's 20 parts on the code. We know that about 15 or 16 of them are going to apply to the AK-47, so let's take a look at those. I've got my trusty AK here to use as an example. Let's start at the back of the firearm and we'll move our way forward. So starting with the stock. This one has a German side folding wire stock, and that's obviously imported. Some US examples though are US rear AR stock adapters, which let you use pretty much any AR stock, or something like the US made thumbhole stocks, which also take the place of a pistol grip. Some of the thumbhole stocks can be tough to find for certain Chinese AKs and some of the more exotic European ones. These AR stock adapters tend to be easy to adapt. Let's move a little further forward. Now we see that this one has a USA made pistol grip on it, but from a few feet away really can't tell a lot of difference between this and, well, an original. Let's take a look at what we've got here. Another USA style, but with a different color. Now this is the original, an original Yugo, and again this one might be what you're looking for ergonomically or for the classic look, and then you'll just choose a different part to comply with. I just brought this one out as an example. You got to be careful. Even though this is bought at a US gun show, it says in there made in Malaysia. I'm not sure if that's coming up on camera, so it really doesn't apply for a 922 compliant part. Let's move a little bit forward, and we've got the trigger group there, and that's 3 trigger pieces: the hammer, the trigger, and the disconnector. Buy them in a package like this. Nice clean parts, fit right into just about any stamped receiver, and you just swap them for the ones that come in your parts kit. Next, let's take a look at the receiver itself. This one you can see is made here in Arizona, so US part number 5, 1, 3 trigger groups, and the receiver is now 5 parts. Of course, if you're getting a Sega, you don't have that option because those are nice receivers made in Russia. So again, you're going to have to look for a different part to comply with. Moving a little bit forward, we have the front trunnion. Now the front trunnion, not really available in the US, wouldn't really apply, so that's one we all have to sort of concede. But here's what the trunnion would look like if it wasn't installed in the rifle. And it's basically the part that the receiver wraps onto and the barrel is inserted into. It also holds the rear sight base in place. So it's a pretty integral part of the firearm, and a lot of people might consider this the backbone of the AK. But then coming forward, beside the handguards, we've got a gas piston. And a typical gas piston is going to look like this one on its carrier. Now this one's a little short because it's for a crank off, but you get the idea that it's screwed in. You can see it's sort of loose here. It's screwed into the front of the carrier. And then a pin is drilled through, and you can just see where it's been pinned and then sanded. I don't know if you can see it even on this side at all, but there's a pin going through there that holds it into place. But this is what the gas piston ends up looking like. There's the threads on this end, and then the piston on this end. And many of the US ones are marked US. Now with this one, you would either drill your own hole through where the holes are on your carrier, or just not drill the hole, but probably better to drill the hole. Now since this rifle has a US piston, a US receiver, 3 US trigger parts, and a US pistol grip, I went ahead and left a German set of handguards on here. So I have a German Bakelite lower and a wooden upper. Something as simple as a polymer version of a standard wood set. But again, you need to be careful because these are, again, made in Malaysia and wouldn't count as a 922 part. Now here's a set of Virgin Yugo handguards. And then install it on their rifle. And if that's the case, simply use some of the other parts for compliance. Moving forward, we have the barrel. On a lot of builds, we had the barrels available. On newer kits, however, the barrels aren't available. On something like a Sega, the barrel is sort of part of the firearm, so you're not about to switch that out easily. But on something like a parts kit, some of the older kits like this one, the barrel was part of the kit, so I'm using an imported barrel. However, a lot of times after the new interpretations of the codes, ATF doesn't allow barrels imported anymore, so you may end up with something like this US made barrel, which again keeps your rifle in compliance, sort of hidden, so that you can run some of the other parts original and keep that classic look. Lastly, out at the end, we've got a muzzle brake. Now, just to keep in compliance, you see this one is a US made one, but there's lots of other options out there. As far as I'm aware, if I were to use a muzzle nut instead, since it doesn't protrude, it doesn't need to be imported. It just negates the muzzle attachment. Or if you want to keep your muzzle attachment, consider some of the more internal modifications. Lastly, since we have an example of them, we have an imported pistol and we have a US made pistol. Now the US made AK pistol only really needs to comply with the 1934 Gun Control Act and its definition of a pistol. However, one that's imported needs to, of course, comply with the 1934 Firearms Act, but it also needs to comply with the 1968 importation changes. So a little bit more regulation on this one. Once they're imported, however, 922R only applies to rifles, so the parts that are used on AK pistols aren't really regulated. So that's another look at 922R compliance with the AK47 rifles and pistols. Feel free to ask any questions or leave any comments. And as always, thanks for watching.
The guys and gals of GunWebsites.com encourage you to take a CCW class every year, practice at least once a month, and carry every day. Thanks for watching GunWebsites.com.